It was just another day in a hospital that never seemed to slow down. Nurses moved swiftly through crowded hallways, balancing trays of medicine, answering urgent calls, and offering words of comfort to patients and their families. The hum of machines blended with the hurried footsteps, creating a rhythm of chaos that only those who work there truly understand. Amelia was one of them. Her hair had slipped from its neat bun hours ago, her shoulders sagged under the weight of exhaustion, and yet, she didn't stop. Patient after patient, she moved with quiet determination, masking her fatigue with the practiced calm of someone who cared too much to let her own struggles show. She had worked 2 double shifts that week already, and today was shaping up to be no different. Among the crowd, unnoticed at first, stood a tall, quiet figure. There was something about him that seemed both out of place and perfectly at ease. Barron Trump wasn't there for attention, far from it. His presence was understated, almost invisible to the hurried staff and preoccupied visitors around him. But his eyes told a different story. He wasn't just standing idly by, he was observing, noticing things others didn't take the time to see. His gaze fell on Amelia, who had just dropped a clipboard in her rush to help a patient. She bent down quickly, muttering a soft apology, her hands shaking as she tried to gather herself. Barron watched the moment unfold, a young woman clearly doing her best in an overwhelming environment, trying to give her all to people who needed her, even though she was clearly running on empty. And then, he moved. Quietly, purposefully. What he did next wasn't loud, and it didn't draw much attention at first. But for those who saw it, and especially for Amelia, it was a moment that would be remembered long after the day ended. You might be wondering, how did Barron Trump find himself in this hospital? Why did he notice Amelia when so many others passed her by? And what did he do that left such a lasting impression? Trust me, you'll want to hear the rest of this story. But before we dive further, let me thank you for being here. Your time means so much to us, and your support makes stories like this possible. Take a second to tell us where you're watching from, drop your location in the comments below. And if this story inspires you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. These small actions help us keep bringing moments of hope and humanity to light. The hospital was busy, as it always seemed to be. The sound of distant voices blended with the soft hum of equipment, while the occasional chime of a call button reminded everyone just how many people needed help. In the middle of it all, Amelia moved quickly, her steps purposeful. She was exhausted, but she couldn't let that show. There were too many people relying on her. Amelia had been working long shifts all week. The weariness was starting to seep into her movements, though she still managed to offer a kind smile to everyone she passed. She had a way of making people feel seen, even when she barely had time to catch her breath. To her patients, she was calm and collected. But to herself, she was struggling. The weight of long hours, financial worries, and family responsibilities had been building up for weeks. She was used to putting everyone else first, even when it left her feeling completely drained. In the waiting area, a young man sat quietly. He wasn't the type to draw attention. He wasn't fidgeting with his phone or looking impatient like many others there. Instead, he watched. His eyes scanned the room, taking in the faces, the movements, the stories unfolding around him. Most people overlooked him, but he wasn't concerned with being noticed. He was concerned with what he was seeing. His focus shifted to Amelia. He didn't know her, but there was something about the way she carried herself that caught his attention. She moved with determination, even though it was clear she was running on empty. He noticed the way her hands trembled slightly when she handed a patient a clipboard and the way she took a deep breath before walking into another room, as if trying to steady herself before facing whatever was next. She had no idea anyone was watching her. She was too focused on her work, on making sure every patient felt cared for, even if it meant pushing through her own exhaustion. She didn't see the young man in the corner, observing quietly. But he saw her. This man wasn't just anyone. He was Barron Trump. Most people knew him only by his last name, a name tied to power and wealth. But sitting there, he was just a young man, dressed simply, with no one around him to announce his presence. He didn't speak or draw attention to himself, but his mind was working. He could see that Amelia was giving everything she had, even though it looked like she had nothing left to give. He didn't know her story yet, but he was about to become a part of it. Amelia's day wasn't unusual for her. Long hours, little rest, and the constant worry of bills piling up at home. She had a younger brother who depended on her, and every paycheck was stretched thin trying to cover his medical expenses. It wasn't easy, but she didn't complain. She just kept going. That's what she'd always done. But today felt harder. Maybe it was the weight of the week catching up with her, or maybe it was the moment when she accidentally dropped a tray of supplies in front of everyone. For a brief second, she froze, her face flushed with embarrassment. She knelt down quickly to gather the scattered items, murmuring apologies, and doing everything she could to hide how tired she really was. That's when Barron stood up. What was he thinking in that moment? What made him decide to act? Those answers were his own, but what he did next would leave a lasting impression, not just on Amelia, but on everyone who saw it. Have you ever found yourself in a moment where someone's unexpected kindness changed everything? Amelia's shift continued with the same relentless pace, and though she was visibly tired, her interactions never lacked warmth. She moved quickly from one patient to the next, her voice calm and her gestures gentle, even as exhaustion tugged at her every step. One particular moment caught Barron's attention. An elderly man sitting in a wheelchair looked confused, his hands shaking as he fumbled with a blanket that had slipped to the floor. Without hesitation, Amelia paused. Though she was clearly pressed for time, she crouched beside the man, tucking the blanket around him with care. "You're okay," she said softly, her tone reassuring. "I'll be back to check on you in just a bit." The man's expression relaxed, and for a moment, the chaos of the hallway seemed to fade away. Barron watched this exchange from his seat. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't dramatic. But it was meaningful. Her ability to connect with someone so quietly and sincerely stood out to him. It wasn't something he saw often, especially not in a world where people were often too busy to notice the small details that mattered most. Minutes later, Amelia was rushing through the hallway, carrying a tray of medical supplies. Her focus was split, her mind juggling the next task and the one after that. In her hurry, she misjudged her step, and the tray slipped from her hands, the contents scattering loudly across the floor. The clattering sound echoed through the space, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. For a brief moment, Amelia froze. Her face flushed, and her shoulders tensed. She knelt down quickly, trying to gather the supplies as murmurs filled the air around her. People glanced her way but then turned back to their own business, avoiding the scene. The unspoken discomfort in the room was palpable. No one wanted to intervene, no one wanted to make the moment more awkward than it already was. But Barron didn't look away. He stood up from his seat, his movements calm and deliberate. Without saying a word, he walked toward Amelia and crouched beside her. His presence was quiet yet unmistakable. He began picking up the scattered items, handing them to her one by one. Amelia glanced at him, surprised, her expression a mix of gratitude and embarrassment. "You've got a lot on your plate," he said, his voice low and steady. "Let me help." The words were simple, but they carried weight. In a moment where she felt exposed, overwhelmed, and alone, his action felt like an anchor. She nodded, her voice soft. "Thank you." Around them, the mood shifted. People who had been watching silently seemed to sit up a little straighter. Some exchanged glances, while others whispered quietly. It wasn't just the act of helping that caught their attention, it was the way Barron did it, without hesitation or expectation of recognition. It was the kind of kindness that didn't need to be explained. In moments like these, it's easy to wonder, what stops us from stepping forward? What makes us turn away when someone could use a hand? Would you have acted differently in that moment? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe in the power of simple acts of kindness to make a difference, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share this story. Barron bent down slowly, picking up a scattered vial and placing it back on the tray without a word. His presence was calm but deliberate, a sharp contrast to the hurried energy surrounding them. "It's okay," he said quietly, his tone steady and kind. "You're doing an amazing job. Don't worry about them." His eyes briefly glanced around the hallway, where onlookers had been too busy watching to help. The words, simple yet unexpected, hung in the air. Amelia looked up at him, startled by his tone. At first, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment, but something about the way he spoke softened the moment. He wasn't patronizing or trying to draw attention to himself. His voice carried a quiet reassurance that she hadn't even realized she needed. The usual noise of the hallway seemed to fade, replaced by an unusual hush. A few people nearby had stopped in their tracks, watching as Barron knelt beside her, calmly helping to gather the last few scattered items. His movements were unhurried, as though he wanted to remind her that it was okay to take a moment to breathe. Amelia straightened up, holding the tray closer to her chest. She hesitated, unsure of what to say. "Thank you," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. For the first time that day, she felt like someone had noticed her, not as a nurse fulfilling her duties but as a person who had been quietly fighting through the exhaustion and stress. Barron stood, meeting her gaze. His expression was thoughtful, as though he was choosing his words carefully. "I've been watching how you treat people," he said, his voice calm but sincere. "It's rare to see someone who cares so much, especially when you have every reason to be frustrated. The world needs more people like you." For a moment, Amelia felt her exhaustion lift, replaced by a wave of gratitude. No one had said anything like that to her before, not in the long days and nights she had spent giving so much of herself to others. Her throat tightened, and her hands gripped the tray a little more firmly as she fought back tears. "Thank you," she said again, this time with a trembling smile. "That means more than you know." The quiet moment between them didn't go unnoticed. Around the hallway, people began to react. A soft clap started from somewhere near the nurse's station, hesitant at first but quickly spreading. A few murmurs of encouragement filled the air, as others who had been silently watching decided to step forward, some nodding at Amelia, others offering her small smiles of support. The atmosphere in the hallway shifted. What had been a tense, hurried environment moments before now felt different. It was as if Barron's simple act of kindness had reminded everyone there that even in the busiest places, there's room for compassion. People who had been walking past stopped to hold doors open or stepped aside to make way for staff. A subtle yet noticeable change had taken place. Have you ever experienced a moment where someone's unexpected kindness made all the difference? What would you have done if you'd witnessed this scene? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Amelia took a deep breath as she stood upright, tray in hand, ready to continue her shift. The brief moment with Barron stayed with her, lingering like a quiet echo in the back of her mind. She couldn't pinpoint why it had affected her so deeply. Perhaps it was the kindness in his voice, or the way he had treated her with such genuine respect. For the first time in what felt like weeks, she didn't feel invisible. As she moved from one patient to the next, something felt different. The weight on her shoulders hadn't vanished, but it felt lighter, more manageable. Her smile came easier, her energy felt just a little steadier. It wasn't just that someone had helped her pick up a tray, it was the reminder that even in the hardest moments, there were people who noticed, people who cared. For the first time in weeks, Amelia felt a spark of renewed purpose in her work. Barron didn't stay to bask in the aftermath of what had happened. He left the hospital quietly, slipping out just as he had arrived, unnoticed by most. There was no fanfare, no lingering to receive thanks. He hadn't done it for attention, he had done it because he felt it was the right thing to do. And that, perhaps, was what made the moment even more meaningful. Days later, Amelia was finishing another long shift when a small package arrived for her at the nurse's station. The handwriting on the outside was neat but unfamiliar. Curious, she opened it and found a handwritten note on crisp stationery. The words stopped her in her tracks. "Dear Amelia, your kindness inspires more than you realize. Thank you for everything you do. Barron." Amelia read the note twice, her throat tightening with emotion. Inside the package, she found a pair of high-quality, supportive shoes, something she desperately needed but hadn't had the chance to buy. There were also small self-care items, carefully chosen to ease the stress of her long days, and tucked beneath it all, a donation that would help her family in ways she couldn't begin to describe. Tears welled in her eyes as she held the note. It wasn't the gifts themselves that mattered most, it was what they represented. Someone had seen her, really seen her, and had taken the time to acknowledge the effort and care she poured into her work every single day. In a world that often felt indifferent, this small act of kindness reminded her that she wasn't alone. As Amelia folded the note and placed it carefully in her pocket, she couldn't help but reflect on the moment in the hallway. That brief interaction had left an impression that rippled far beyond what Barron might have realized. It wasn't about grand gestures or sweeping changes, it was about noticing someone, valuing them, and taking a moment to remind them that what they do matters. Let me ask you, viewers, have you ever had a moment where someone's small act of kindness changed the way you saw yourself or your situation? What would you do if you had the chance to pay it forward? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story has touched you, please take a second to like, share, and subscribe. In a world that moves so quickly, it's easy to overlook the silent battles that others are fighting. Every day, people like Amelia give their all, often with little recognition or thanks. What Barron Trump did that day wasn't about making a grand statement, it was about noticing someone in need and choosing to act. It was a reminder of the power we each hold to make a difference, no matter how small the gesture might seem. That simple moment of kindness didn't just lighten Amelia's day, it reminded her of her own strength and worth. It showed everyone who witnessed it that compassion isn't complicated, it's about paying attention and being willing to step forward when others hesitate. Kindness doesn't always need to be loud or public, it just needs to be real. Let me ask you this, how often do we pass by someone who might need a helping hand? Would you have stopped in Barron's shoes? Could you step outside of your comfort zone to make someone else's day a little better? These are questions we should all reflect on, not just as individuals but as a community. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the power of kindness in your own life, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe to our channel. Together, we can keep sharing stories that remind us of the good that exists in the world, and maybe, just maybe, inspire others to create more moments like these. Thank you for watching and for being part of this journey. Remember, every small act of kindness has the potential to make a big impact, even if you may never know just how far it goes.